I was sitting with a friend the other day, and she was doom swiping on a dating app.
Oh, the doom swipe. I know it well.
Yeah, she was just exhausted, complaining that the whole system felt, dehumanized, like a meat market where nobody cared about real connection. She kept saying over and over that she just wanted someone kind, stable, and down to earth.
The things everyone says they want.
Exactly. But then, watching her thumb actually operate, I saw a completely different story playing out. It was ruthless.
Oh, so.
I mean, swipe left, swipe left, swipe left. A guy with a kind smile, but a messy room, gone in a microsecond.
Right.
A guy who wrote this really thoughtful bio but looked, I don't know, a bit short in his picture, gone. She was discarding human beings with the speed and the efficiency of a factory sorting machine.
That's a powerful image.
Then she suddenly stopped. Her thumb just hovered. The profile was of a guy leaning against a high-end luxury car, wearing a tailored suit, literally standing on top of a mountain summit. And just moments before, she had been ranting about how shallow modern dating is. But right then, her eyes widened, and this distinct look of, interest washed over her face. She didn't check for kindness.
No, of course
So
not.
she swiped right. Immediately.
And did you call her on it?
I did. I pointed out the contradiction, that she just swiped on the exact type of flashy display she claimed to hate, and she got defensive, really defensive. She couldn't articulate why she did it. She just sort of muttered that he looked competent.
Competent. That word is doing so much work there.
It's everything, isn't it?
Yeah.
That specific moment of cognitive dissonance was just so striking. On the surface, she's a modern individual looking for love, but underneath, a much older, colder logic had just completely hijacked her brain. It made me realize that while she blamed the app for all the chaos, the glitch wasn't in the software on her phone. It was in the ancient software running in her mind. A survival code written for the Pleistocene savanna that is now, wreaking havoc in the 21st century.
And that's the whole ball game right there.
That friction, that clash between modern identity and an almost inexplicable biological drive, that's our mission today. We are taking a deep dive into the psychological and sociological consequences of this evolutionary mismatch in mating.
Right.
We're analyzing how these ancient drives clash with our hyperscale digital environments, how the platforms amplify or maybe even mitigate this internal conflict, and what that reveals about the core of human desire.
And that defensiveness you witnessed is the perfect illustration of that central tension. It's so important. What looks like a personal failing or, hypocrisy is actually the predictable output of these deep foundational evolutionary strategies.
So it's not her fault, it's her programming.
In a way, yes. We're going to explore how concepts like parental investment theory influence far more than just your friend's swiping behavior. These deep codes inform, everything. Career choices, financial stability, and even the fundamental architecture of the apps we use for intimacy.
So this is about much more than just dating apps.
Much more. This deep dive will explore how that ancient software is still dictating outcomes in the digital age. We're investigating the psychological and sociological consequences of this evolutionary mismatch between, ancient human mating instincts and the hyperscaled anonymous digital dating environment, particularly concerning mental well-being and relationship formation in developed economies.
And it goes beyond that into the workplace.
Absolutely. We'll look at the mechanisms of sexual selection and how they shape gendered career trajectories. And then ultimately, we have to examine the ethical challenges for these digital dating platforms when they're leveraging these powerful, powerful biological instincts.
Okay, let's unpack this ancient software then.
Yeah.
Let's start with what feels like the cornerstone theory in this field.
Yeah.
Parental Investment Theory, or PIT. It sounds a bit dry, a bit academic, but it really does feel like the key to understanding all of this.
It is. It's the foundation.
It was established by Robert Trivers back in the 70s. So what is PIT, and why does it create such a foundational difference in male and female mating strategies?
So, parental investment theory, defined by Trivers, is essentially, think of it as evolution's accounting department.
I like that, the accounting department.
Right. It states that any investment a parent makes in an offspring, that could be time, metabolic energy, resources, risk anything that increases that offspring's chances of survival and reproduction, it necessarily incurs an opportunity cost.
Meaning you can't spend that resource on something else.
Exactly. It comes at the expense of the parent's ability to invest in other potential offspring. At its core, it's a calculation of trade-offs, all designed to maximize the spread of one's own genes into the next generation.
So Trivers is basically asking, who pays the bigger bill for having a baby, and how does that financial burden, so to speak, influence their behavior?
That's a perfect way to put it. And the moment you examine the obligatory biological investment, you see a massive and really an undeniable divergence between the sexes, especially in human biology. And this divergence is the engine that drives sexual selection.
Okay, so let's quantify that difference, because I think the sheer scale of it is hard for people to grasp. We're talking about basic reproductive biology here.
We can start right at the cellular level. A human female is born with a fixed and relatively small supply of ova. We're talking maybe around 400 total that will actually be released throughout her reproductive life.
400 total chances.
And once those are gone, reproduction stops. Now, contrast that with human males who produce sperm at a continuous, just astronomical rate. We're talking roughly 12 million cells per hour.
12 million per hour versus 400 total. That's a difference between a fixed, incredibly valuable resource pool and a near infinite, almost disposable one.
Precisely. And that's just the initial cellular investment. The rearing investment is where the disparity truly explodes in humans.
After conception.
Yes. For a woman, one single successful act of sexual intercourse can result in an unavoidable, non-negotiable 9-month commitment of human gestation.
There's no getting around that.
No. And this is followed by the huge metabolic demands of childbirth, recovery, and then subsequent rearing commitments like breastfeeding, which is a major nutritional and time investment. This biological commitment, the time, the nutrients, the very real dangers of childbirth, it massively, massively outweighs the man's initial investment of, a single effective sperm cell.
So the woman's cost is high, it's risky, and it's fixed. The man's cost, on the other hand, is low, flexible, and repeatable.
And this leads directly to the strategic consequences. Because females are the high-investing sex, their investment is biologically irreplaceable. Evolutionary pressure favors those who are highly selective in their mate choice.
They just can't afford to get it wrong.
They cannot afford to waste 9 months of gestation or the subsequent years of rearing on a partner who will defect or provide insufficient resources or, offer poor genes. The stakes are just too high.
So selectivity becomes the primary adaptive strategy for females.
Yeah.
And this brings us right back to my friend and her competent mountain climber. What signals are women historically and even unconsciously today evaluating to make sure their investment pays off?
The primary goal, evolutionarily speaking, is to evaluate the male's ability to provide high parental investment. That means resources, protection, and reliability. This is where status symbols and displays of competence come into play.
The suit, the car, the mountain.
The suit, the car, the mountain. Women become very keen evaluators of men's potential earning capacity, their ambition, their career orientation, all these traits that signal future resource acquisition, and crucially, the ability to commit those resources.
So these are not random preferences. They're not just shallow.
They are anything but. They are universally understood signals of competence, status, and resource access. That's why we see this consistency across so many diverse cultures. When women are seeking a long-term partner, their emphasis is heavily, heavily placed on traits associated with high commitment and resource stability.
It's not just about having kids.
It's about finding a reliable co-parent who ensures those children survive and thrive, which maximizes that huge original biological investment.
Okay, that makes perfect sense for long-term commitment. But let's flip it. What are the strategic consequences for males? If they're the low-investing sex, their strategy must shift from selectivity to, competition and access.
Absolutely. For males, the reproductive challenge is centered almost entirely on competing effectively for access to the high-investing female. This intersexual competition, male against male, means that traits associated with success in that competition became highly desirable signals.
Like what specifically?
Things like physical strength, assertiveness, a higher tolerance for risk, and of course, resource acquisition. These traits communicate a very clear message. I am high status, I am genetically robust, I can provide, and I can protect the investment you're about to make.
So the entire male strategy is focused on demonstrating these signals that can overcome the female's natural selectivity barrier.
Yes, that's a great way to put it. And conversely, men's mate choice, while it also values things like competence and stability, is fundamentally influenced by female physical attractiveness. And that's because, from an evolutionary perspective, it served as a more reliable proxy for fertility, health, and genetic quality.
So things like clear skin, facial symmetry.
Exactly. Clear skin, facial symmetry, specific body metrics like the waist-to-hip ratio. In ancestral environments, these were all reliable indicators that signaled robust health and high reproductive potential, thereby enhancing the male's likelihood of producing viable offspring.
So it's a system, a
Mm.
feedback loop.
It's a system where female selectivity drives male competition, and male competition drives the display of resources and status. It's an engine that has been running for millions of years.
Okay, so now we take that brutal equation, as you called it, that foundational difference in investment and strategy, and we overlay it onto the modern economy, which is, supposedly egalitarian. The source material suggests these evolved strategies contribute significantly to modern phenomena like the pay gap and the glass ceiling.
And this is where we move from the purely biological to the sociological, but we bring that foundation of evolutionary psychology with us. Traits that are traditionally viewed through a purely cultural lens as masculine, things like risk-taking, assertiveness, heavy competition.
And feminine traits like nurturing, cooperation, valuing stability.
Exactly. Those all have deep adaptive roots.
Because males were adapting to the demands of resource acquisition and protecting the group, while females were adapting to the demands of caregiving and ensuring offspring survival.
That's the simplest way to frame the different adaptive pressures they faced. And these evolved traits, driven by millions of years of sexual selection, they don't just vanish because we invented spreadsheets. They translate directly into economic decision-making and professional preferences in the 21st century.
It's not about some deliberate design, it's about emergent outcomes.
Precisely.
Now, this is a very complex and, let's be honest, an often politically charged topic. When we talk about the gender pay gap, we have to acknowledge that there are many structural factors at play: discrimination, promotion bias, societal expectations.
Of course, no one is denying those exist.
But the evolutionary lens introduces the idea that differences in professional choice, which are driven by these evolved preferences, also play a substantial role.
Exactly. We have to report impartially on the academic interpretations presented in the source material here. And a comprehensive evolutionary analysis suggests that while discrimination certainly exists and is a factor, wage disparities also arise significantly from differences in career choices, hours worked, willingness to negotiate or take risks, and preferences for work-life balance.
So the evolutionary framework interprets things like the pay gap and the glass ceiling not solely as, say, intentional subjugation.
Right, but as the predictable outcomes that emerge when you have two different but equally successful adaptive strategies playing out in a competitive capitalist environment.
Let's really focus on that risk element. If women historically prioritize stability for offspring survival, which is the opposite of a risky environment, how does that manifest in career decisions today?
It tends to translate into higher risk aversion generally, and this is a behavioral trait that is often linked biologically to hormonal profiles, lower levels of testosterone and higher levels of hormones like estrogen and oxytocin, which are known to promote bonding and caution.
It's an ancient safety protocol.
It is. For the adaptive strategy of ensuring security for your offspring, avoiding high volatility environments is absolutely critical.
So what kinds of careers does that lead to?
Well, consequently, you see women often selecting career paths that promise stability, predictability, a steady income, and high job security. We see a disproportionate representation in fields like education, public administration, nursing, and healthcare, all careers that promote family stability and community structure.
And these roles are essential, but maybe they have a lower maximum earning potential compared to those high volatility winner-take-all fields.
That is often the case, yes.
And for men, that ancient drive for resource acquisition means they're more likely to embrace that volatility.
Yes. Men whose reproductive success historically hinged on maximizing resource acquisition to support a family and community tend to prioritize career advancement and financial gain, often over things like work-life balance or stability.
So they're willing to take the bigger risks for the bigger payout.
This predisposition leads them to accept high-stress roles, heavy travel requirements, and extremely long hours, all characteristics of positions that often lead to the highest earning potential. Think corporate law, high finance, or competitive sales.
I can really see the contrast there. Stability versus maximization. And if stability is paramount for the high-investing sex, then work-life balance must also be a huge factor in these choices.
It is a profound differentiator. The research on lifestyle preferences strongly supports the idea that women disproportionately value flexibility and work-life balance, which is entirely consistent with that adaptive need for primary caregiving.
They're more likely to take a step back from their career for family.
They are more likely to pursue part-time roles, utilize flexible arrangements, or take career pauses to accommodate family responsibilities. Men, on the other hand, consistently prioritize career advancement that's linked to maximizing resources. This leads to fewer career interruptions and a stronger emphasis on accumulating status and those financial markers.
And when you aggregate that across millions of people,
It results in significant economic stratification. It's a divergence in priorities that, when it plays out in a free market system, creates a statistical gap.
so the argument is that what we see in the economy is influenced by evolved preferences, not just external oppression. But that's a tough concept for a lot of people to swallow. The sources offer a really powerful, real-world counter-argument to the idea that these differences are purely cultural, and that's the Israeli Kibbutzim experiment.
Yes. The Kibbutz case is incredibly illuminating. It's so important because it was arguably the purest attempt in modern history to engineer total gender equality and neutralize those cultural factors.
When did this start?
It was established way back in 1909. The founders were radical egalitarians. I mean, they sought to abolish the nuclear family and traditional gender roles entirely. They communalized child rearing and required men and women to perform identical jobs.
So they were operating under the ideological belief that gender differences were just cultural constructs.
Entirely. They believed you could eliminate them just by changing the social structure.
They took the blank slate ideology and literally built a society on it. So what happened? When they removed the perceived structures of patriarchy, did the social roles just disappear?
Far from it. The experiment, over decades, saw a gradual and almost universal reversion to traditional gender patterns. And this is the crucial part. This reversion wasn't imposed by men.
It came from the women themselves.
Anthropological research shows it occurred because women themselves willingly, and sometimes forcefully, chose roles that were aligned with these biological imperatives.
What kind of roles did they choose to move into?
Women systematically gravitated toward caregiving roles, working with children, education, nursing, and also less strenuous labor, like working in the communal laundries or kitchens. Meanwhile, men moved into the physically demanding, the technical, or the high-status leadership roles.
So agricultural management, security.
Exactly, industrial operations, things like that. And crucially, mothers increasingly rejected the communal child-rearing model. They started demanding more private time with their own children, wanting to live in family-centered units.
Oh.
And they even began re-embracing feminine expressions like wearing makeup and personalizing their dress, which the community had originally banned as being too bourgeois.
So the kibbutz, which was designed to eliminate all external influence, ended up looking like a highly traditional society because of internal voluntary choices primarily made by women.
It is a profoundly important case study. It really underscores the enduring influence of innate preferences and biological imperatives. Even in a highly controlled, deeply ideological social environment designed explicitly to eliminate gender distinctions, the social structures that emerged naturally resembled those found in the broader society.
It pushes back hard against the idea that our behavior is infinitely malleable.
It demonstrates the powerful, resilient influence of these evolved predispositions on behavior and role selection.
So the suit, the car, the competence, that's not an accident. That's the 4 million-year-old software dictating what a high-value investment looks like. So we understand the ancient code. Now let's see what happens when we run that code on the ultimate modern network, the digital dating environment. Online dating didn't invent matchmaking, of course, but the sheer scale of the technology creates an entirely new kind of problem.
The most profound change online dating has introduced is, in a word, access. Unprecedented access. Before, your dating pool was geographically and socially constrained, people you met at work, at school, through mutual friends. Now, these platforms offer access to thousands, potentially millions of potential partners whom you would otherwise never, ever encounter.
And access sounds like the ultimate advantage. More choice, more control. But the mechanics of profile browsing seem to fundamentally change how we make those choices, and often for the worse.
That's exactly where the flaw lies. The interface itself forces users into what researchers call a joint evaluation mode.
Joint evaluation mode.
It means when you're constantly looking at dozens or hundreds of profiles side by side, comparing options, your brain switches gears. It goes from seeking intimacy to purchasing commodities.
So users become engaged in, what was the term, relation shopping.
Relation shopping. It sounds like buying a used car, and that's not an accident.
That's not finding a lifelong partner.
It has a deeply dehumanizing effect because this comparison mode forces users to prioritize easily searchable attributes. The things that are easily quantified on the profile: income, height, education, job title, and of course, physical attractiveness.
Things you can sort by in a spreadsheet.
Exactly. They are simple to compare using rapid superficial cognition. Your friend swiping on the competent mountaineer was rapidly assessing a set of searchable, status-based attributes.
And in that process, the essential qualities, the experiential ones, they get completely sidelined because they can't be easily searched or displayed on a profile.
Precisely. Experiential attributes like genuine rapport, a shared sense of humor, communication style, how you handle conflict, emotional chemistry, these are the things necessary for long-term satisfaction.
And you can only evaluate them face-to-face over time.
Right. The inherent design of the app focuses users on the easy metrics, which leads to the commoditization and objectification of potential partners. It just fundamentally interferes with the communal, vulnerability-based mindset needed for a healthy relationship.
So we are optimized for efficiently finding people based on metrics that don't actually predict long-term happiness. And this brings us to the endless stream of profiles, the sheer volume of choice. Logically, more options should yield better results, but the science suggests the opposite is true.
This is the classic choice overload paradox. When users are exposed to these huge choice sets, hundreds or even thousands of potential matches, it often leads to choice paralysis and, critically, lower satisfaction with the eventual decision you do make.
So the abundance, despite the feeling of control it gives you at first,
it quickly overwhelms the user's cognitive capacity. Trying to compare 500 potential matches requires shortcuts. You can't do a deep dive on everyone.
So you default to the easy stuff.
You do. Research demonstrates that users browsing large choice sets make decisions that diverge more significantly from their own stated preferences. And they use less careful, often superficial cognitive strategies, like focusing only on the first photo or the highest status indicator, as a defense mechanism against that information overload.
So when my friend was doom swiping, she wasn't actually following her stated preference for kind and stable. She was just quickly sorting based on the flashy, easily searchable metric of competence, driven by the chaos of having too many options.
That's a key insight. The quality of your decision-making actually decreases the more options you have, and furthermore, this abundance creates a fundamental commitment problem.
How so?
The mere perception of available, appealing alternatives is a strong, persistent predictor of low commitment to a current partner, and eventually, relationship dissolution.
Because there might be someone better just around the corner.
Why commit to a great but imperfect match when the system is constantly flashing up evidence that the perfect, ideal match is potentially just one more swipe away? The system promotes perpetual seeking, which makes long-term investment less likely because the opportunity cost of stopping your search feels just too high.
Okay, so to combat this chaos and the paralysis, the major dating sites claim to solve the problem with their proprietary algorithms and compatibility scores. They market themselves as scientific matchmakers, suggesting they're superior to traditional dating methods. Do these matching claims actually hold up under psychological scrutiny?
It's a very bold marketing claim, isn't it, that they use science to pinpoint your perfect partner. But the psychological science that critiques these matching systems, such as the ones used by early sites like eHarmony or later iterations, it reveals some inherent limitations.
Big limitations.
Yes. Simply put, there are severe limitations in predicting long-term relationship success based solely on individual qualities, personality traits, values, interests assessed before two partners ever interact.
So you can assess my personality, my income, my hobbies, but you can't assess how I react when the kitchen sink backs up or how we communicate during a major financial crisis.
Exactly. Matching algorithms necessarily exclude the two most crucial predictors of relationship longevity and satisfaction. First, as you said, they miss the quality of interaction.
Communication, conflict resolution.
All of it. Communication patterns, conflict resolution skills, shared laughter, emotional attunement, which can only be assessed through shared experience. And second, they exclude context and circumstance.
What falls under that?
All the external factors: financial stress, in-law relationships, social support networks, health challenges. These external factors are powerful stressors and predictors of relationship outcomes, yet they are completely invisible to a pre-meeting profile score.
So the algorithms are fundamentally incomplete because they can only measure the individual parts, not the dynamic interaction of those parts in the real world.
Correct. And that leads to a crucial point about personality. While relationship aptitude definitely matters, having a personality that is generally conducive to success, like being low in neuroticism, predicts better outcomes regardless of the partner.
So it's good to just find a well-adjusted person in general.
It's a huge advantage. But the core premise of most algorithms, which is compatibility based on personality similarity or complementarity, has extremely weak empirical support.
So the idea that you need someone just like you or your exact opposite.
That idea is not well supported by the data. People often assume they should seek someone who is exactly like them, or someone who perfectly complements their flaws. But relationship science shows that finding a partner who possesses the general capacity for a successful relationship, someone who is mature, emotionally regulated, and willing to put in the work, is far more important than finding someone whose traits perfectly match yours on a checklist.
So the algorithms promise a perfect trait match, but the science supports just finding a high-capacity partner.
Precisely.
So if the algorithms aren't delivering these scientifically superior matches, then why do some studies indicate that couples who meet online sometimes report lower divorce rates or even greater satisfaction? Is it just a massive coincidence?
Well, it may be due to powerful psychological factors, a kind of relationship placebo effect.
A placebo effect. Interesting.
If a user believes strongly in the validity of the site's algorithm, that this match was scientifically calculated just for them, that belief itself provides a huge boost in motivation and commitment.
That sounds a bit like the endowment effect. You feel you've already invested in this scientifically validated prospect, so you commit more heavily from the start.
And once they commit, confirmation bias takes over. They are actively seeking evidence that confirms the algorithm's initial prediction of compatibility. They might focus conversations solely on known common interests rather than on more challenging or ambiguous topics.
They're trying to prove the algorithm right.
And this increased focused effort, which is driven by their belief in the process, creates a positive self-fulfilling prophecy. The user's effort, fueled by their faith in the math, becomes the active ingredient, not the mathematical genius of the algorithm itself.
So the irony is that the relationship might succeed because the users believe it should, not because the underlying metrics were ever predictive.
Exactly.
And this whole belief system feeds into what you call the soulmate trap.
It does. The ideology promoted by so many of these matching sites, emphasizing the need to find a soulmate or the perfect partner, is scientifically misleading. It promotes an ideology of compatibility based on destiny rather than on effort.
Which is dangerous.
It is, because it encourages users to persist in searching for an elusive perfection, which often undermines otherwise rewarding yet imperfect relationships they might currently possess.
Because why work on this one when the perfect one is out there?
Exactly. This premise is often stated outright by site founders, this idea that mismatchedness will always win out over hard work. That claim is directly contradicted by decades of psychological research showing that successful relationships require dedication, communication skills, and continuous effort. By promoting the search for an effortlessly perfect soulmate, the system subtly encourages a transactional, evaluative mindset rather than the communal, effort-based one that's necessary for long-term fulfillment.
So the system is designed to keep you scrolling, constantly assessing the next potential perfect option, rather than investing your resources into the good one you already found. It rewards the search over the settlement. We've established this deep friction between the ancient code and the digital distortion. Now let's tackle what happens when ancient preferences and modern prejudice meet the infinite scale of a digital platform. The intimate realm seems to be one of the last places where explicit, blatant discrimination is not only permitted, but structurally supported.
That is the harsh reality. The search for intimacy often remains one of the few domains where individuals feel entitled to express explicit prejudicial preferences, particularly along lines of race, body type, or disability. This behavioral pattern is widely evidenced and often labeled as sexual racism.
And this isn't subtle, is it? The evidence is widespread and explicit on these platforms.
Absolutely not. The research documents user profiles that are just laced with explicit racial exclusions. You see phrases like no Indians, no Asians, no Africans, or exclusionary requirements that just amount to race-based filtering.
And the platforms themselves enable this.
The problem is compounded because the platform design itself often facilitates and normalizes this explicit exclusion through features like search filters and simplified racial or ethnic labels. So even if a user doesn't harbor overt racial animus, the system implicitly presents these discriminatory preferences as normal and acceptable choices in the dating marketplace.
So the platform, by allowing you to filter based on prejudice, is reinforcing existing racial stereotypes and hierarchies within the user base. Becomes a harmful feedback loop.
It is, and this has severe consequences that go beyond just hurt feelings or rejection. Discrimination and marginalization on intimate platforms are directly linked to documented public health outcomes for minority groups.
Really? How so?
For instance, studies show that Asian men often experience negative stereotyping, sometimes being perceived as effeminate or submissive in white-dominated dating spaces. This marginalization can push users into submissive or riskier intimate roles, which can potentially increase their vulnerability to contracting sexually transmitted infections.
That's a direct physical consequence.
It is. And similarly, studies focusing on gay, Latino, and Black men found that experiences of social discrimination within these intimate online platforms predicted an increased likelihood of engaging in high-risk sexual behavior. The reinforcement of social hierarchies by the platforms translates into quantifiable, real-world social and health harm for marginalized communities.
Okay, the explicit bias is bad enough. But the source material introduces a concept that is far more unsettling: the subtle algorithmic capture of what you call the uncanny user unconscious. Let's define that again accessibly.
The uncanny user unconscious refers to the totality of disavowed thoughts and biases, including racial, class, and aesthetic preferences, that the user might not consciously admit to holding, but which are meticulously captured and metabolized by algorithmic systems.
So the user might say they're open to all races, but there are thousands of swipe traces tell the algorithm the truth about their deeply held, potentially unconscious biases.
Precisely. The system records your actual behavior and then it weaponizes it. It folds this subconscious bias into the system's core functioning, often through these very opaque ranking mechanisms. And the most visible way this happens is through the use of an ELO-inspired ranking system.
Right. This is the system that became famous or infamous on platforms like Tinder, which assigned an attractiveness score. How exactly does that ELO-inspired system work, and why does it embed collective bias?
So the ELO rating was originally developed for competitive zero-sum games like chess. In the context of a dating app, a user is ranked based on the ratio of right swipes or likes to left swipes or dislikes that they receive.
It's a popularity contest.
It is. If a high-ranking user swipes right on you, your score goes up significantly. If a low-ranking user swipes right on you, it barely moves. Essentially, every single swipe becomes a competitive vote that determines your aggregated value in the dating marketplace.
Which means the system embeds collective bias by design. A user's ranking is entirely dependent on the pre-existing pooled preferences of the entire user base.
That is the crucial point. Even if the platform code is technically colorblind and doesn't use race as a direct parameter, the generated attractiveness scores are heavily influenced by the collective, pre-existing social and racial biases of the entire user base.
So if most users prefer one group, that group gets a higher score.
If the majority of users, consciously or unconsciously, prefer one racial or socioeconomic group over another, that preference becomes statistically solidified as a measurable, platform-wide attractiveness hierarchy.
So the algorithm is not eliminating prejudice, it's capturing it, validating it, and amplifying it. It's creating a kind of statistical segregation.
And the opacity of the algorithm is absolutely key to its success and its insidious nature. It hides this systemic inequality. Users can continue to mindlessly swipe according to their pooled, biased preference without ever having to confront that bias or, feel bad about discounting people.
The discrimination is outsourced to the code.
It is. The source material frames this exploitation as a form of population racism. The system profits not by controlling individuals directly, but by statistically organizing and manipulating groupings of characteristics, those digital traces of desire, and then calibrating the effective environment.
And what's the result of that?
It ensures efficient connection for some groups, but only against an underlying amplification of social disadvantage or social death for others. The algorithm's primary goal is engagement and optimization, and if leveraging and solidifying mass preferences achieves that, it will continue to do so regardless of the social cost.
So the app didn't just digitize the meat market, it gave the factory sorting machine a complex, opaque scoring system designed to entrench existing hierarchies for profit. Now let's tie this all back to the user herself. We are studying people who are experiencing this acute friction between ancient code and modern tech, and the research suggests that the population most often studied young adults in Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic societies or weird societies represents a critical case of evolutionary mismatch.
The acronym we use to highlight these divergent characteristics is strangely weird, and the characteristic we really need to focus on right now is the Y for young. Modern Western young adults, typically in their late teens and 20s, are operating at a radically different life history stage compared to their ancestral counterparts.
Okay, help us contrast that.
Uh,
What was the life stage of someone in their early 20s in the ancestral environment?
Well, based on data from extant hunter-gatherer groups and historical models, someone in their late teens or early 20s would have been an experienced adult.
Already an adult.
Yes. They were often experienced parents, had developed essential adult subsistence skills hunting, gathering, community management, and they possessed a clear, stable social standing within the group. Their mate selection decisions were typically made with the full social support and established structure of their community.
And contrast that with today.
By contrast, modern Western young adults are in a novel, extended period of psychological development. They're often delaying stable careers and starting families until their late 20s or even 30s. They are cognitively mature, but may lack extensive real-world relational experience.
So we have a situation of high input, low experience.
Exactly.
They have unprecedented levels of autonomy in their mate choice and a massive amount of input. All those social media cues, thousands of options on dating apps. But they have fewer years of social and cognitive development to guide these very high-stakes mate selection decisions compared to ancestors of the same biological age.
This creates a critical mismatch. They are navigating the most complex, high-stakes decisions of their reproductive life: who to mate with, how to choose, how to commit, under conditions that actively undermine careful, patient evaluation.
So they have more options than ever before, but often less developmental maturity to handle the cognitive burden of those options.
You've got it. Ancestrally, sexual exploration in early adolescence would have been less costly to premenarchal girls. Today, these young adults are entering the reproductive phase of their lives with maximum options and autonomy, but with developmental timelines that keep them in a learning phase for much longer.
That makes the dating app not just a fun new invention, but an unintentional, incredibly high-pressure stress test for the universal design features of human mating psychology.
Exactly. Studying this specific population, these strangely weird, is crucial because their behavior, which is influenced by this intense friction and the sheer volume of choices, provides us with unique insight into how our evolved psychological mechanisms operate when they are pushed completely outside the range of ancestral environmental conditions. The tech is simultaneously relying on and exploiting the deepest, most sensitive parts of our evolved psychology.
This deep dive has been absolutely illuminating. The story of my friend doom swiping, muttering that the mountain climbing suit model looked competent, it ceases to be a moment of personal hypocrisy and becomes a perfectly predictable output of ancient survival code running on a hypermodern network.
The friction you described at the beginning is the sound of our ancient survival logic colliding with hyperscale technology. These platforms promised unlimited access and scientific compatibility, but what they often deliver is choice overload, superficial evaluation, and, through opaque algorithmic design, the systematic capture and solidification of pre-existing social and racial biases.
The software glitch wasn't in the app. It was the 4 million-year-old code running in the user, but the app was expertly designed to capture and monetize that glitch.
The true power of the application is not in overriding our decision-making autonomy. It's far more subtle than that. The power lies in framing and expanding our intimate possibilities in a way that captures, organizes, and recurses the biases we unconsciously carry. The glitch is simply the predictable evolutionary outcome of running parental investment theory and the competitive dynamics of sexual selection on a 21st century profit-driven network. This network, by hiding the mechanisms of bias in impenetrable code, keeps the structural inequality it amplifies from public scrutiny, allowing the user to continue the search for the perfect mate without ever having to confront the social costs of their preference.